It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. We're back at it, back on the podcast this morning, and I've got a person on the live line, as we call it here, that's kind of important to me on several different fronts. She's a journalism hero, and she's also someone that's leading the fight when it comes to the world's ecology. We talk about that on the podcast a lot. We talk about the climate crisis a lot. But my God, we are drowning in plastics around the globe, folks. And this young lady is taking matters into her own hands. And I wanted to get her on the podcast because this is a really big deal. Joining us on the live line this morning is Brynn Baker. And Brynn hi, Brynn, good morning to you. She's working for the Meredith Corporation. She's got a very special challenge, a trek that's coming up in about a year or so that she's preparing for. Brynn, tell the folks what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I was hand-selected out of 10,000 international applicants to join EXXpedition around the world, 2019 through 2021. It's an all-female sailing voyage to study and research ocean plastics, the ocean plastic crisis. My leg of the journey will be this July of 2020, and I will be on the boat for about 3 weeks, and we'll be doing surface samples, mannitol samples, sediment samples, and really digging into where the plastic is coming from, how it's being mismanaged on land, and how it's circulating around our planet.
Well, you're going to Australia, and that's big news right now because the continent is basically ablaze. I mean, it's been burning up now for a week or so. And I think about Australia a lot because of the damage that's been done to the Great Coral Reef and also because of these wildfires. And Australia is also got a real plastics problem. I saw something like 5 trillion pieces of plastic or something. What's going on out there?
Well, the plastic's everywhere. I mean, there's a lot, especially in the Great Barrier Reef, but it's everywhere. It's not just Australia's problem. There's 8 million tons of plastic that enter the oceans every single year, especially single-use plastics like straws and plastic bags. In fact, 1 million plastic bags, or single-use plastic bags, are discarded every minute worldwide. And that really put it in perspective for me, because think about that. A plastic bag that's meant to be used for 15 minutes is made out of a material that's designed to last forever. So every piece of plastic that has ever been made still exists and will always exist. And we have nowhere to put it.
I was really struck by this coverage I saw on your trip about how you first got involved. And I guess I have not seen these photos, or I was not aware of this. You've seen it firsthand. I mean, the glaciers are melting, the icebergs are disappearing, but the icebergs that are still out there have an interesting sidecar, I would call it, that you saw. Tell us what you've seen.
Yeah, well, in 2012, I lived in Alaska for a year with my family. And every weekend we went out exploring and on adventures, and we spent a lot of our time on the ocean. And when we are out on whale charters to go, see the marine life, and out kayaking some of the rivers, out in the ocean especially, we saw a lot of ghosted fishing nets just floating along there next to the icebergs. And those are either left behind or lost track of while they're out there, but they trap whales, they trap sharks, they trap fish. And a lot of marine life is dying out there. And that was the first. What?
I've never heard of that. To back up just a second, ghost nets, right? That's what they're called, yep. Ghost nets?
Yep, because they're forgotten or abandoned or lost, and they're just floating out there, entangling marine life. That's when I first learned about the problem of plastics in the ocean. Up in the most remote, pristine wilderness, you still see it.
And that problem isn't going away because the plastics aren't going away. They last forever unless we figure out some way to get them out of the water. Now, this is a special interest to women, or it should be anyway, because these little pieces of plastic, these microplastics that are contaminating the earth, are of unique hazard to women. Explain that.
Yes, especially the little microplastics that are getting into the ocean because fish and other marine life are ingesting them, thinking it's part of their food. A lot of bags are being eaten thinking they're jellyfish, and little microplastics are being eaten thinking they're little pieces of algae or smaller fish. And that's getting into the bigger fish and the bigger fish and growing up the food chain, and it gets into our food chain. And the plastics have chemicals in them that are endocrine disruptors, and that really affects women's health. It can cause breast cancer, it can cause reproductive health issues. It just affects women a lot more than it affects men. That's why EXXpedition is an all-female sailing research mission, and the XX in EXXpedition is for the double X chromosomes in females.
You know, my wife is a big recycler. We do what we can. It makes you feel good, but I was kind of shocked, and I think a lot of people would be also, to know how little of this actually can and is recycled. And it all goes back, I think, on the plastics to this single-use part.
Yes. I actually just recently toured the Des Moines Recycling Center, Mid-America, and they said more than 20% of the stuff they get in that people are recycling is not recyclable at all. And it just contaminates the good stuff that they can repurpose. When I was there, we saw microwave doors, we saw bed sheets, we saw shoes coming through. One of the biggest issues is the clamshell containers that carry like fruits and vegetables, the plastic bins that you buy at the grocery store full of that. A lot of people assume that's recyclable because it's a harder plastic, but it's not. And that can jam their machines and really disrupt the good stuff coming through. Wishful recycling is probably one of the biggest problems. A lot of people want to do good and think they're doing a good thing, but in the end, it's causing more problems.
Well, and I actually, it made me think. I know somebody that tried to recycle a bicycle, believe it or not, and people just don't understand it. They don't think, but I think it had an aluminum frame, and they thought, oh, this would be great recycling material, and they actually put it out for the recycling truck. And these single-use plastics, what a lot of people don't understand or think about when it comes to this, well, how can this be? That's a good question to ask. But this is what happens when you have unfettered commercialism. I mean, it's marketing, folks. I mean, these plastics and their different single uses differentiate them from a plastics perspective. Maybe from a use perspective makes them a little easier and that type of thing, but it makes them all different. Well, that's a good thing from a marketing perspective, but when it comes from a saving the planet thing, it's a horrible thing. Is there any move to make these plastics more uniform in their manufacture so that they can be recycled?
I don't know too much about the manufacturing side on what types of plastics for certain products. The best thing to do is just to eliminate as much plastic in your daily life as you can. Cut out the plastic bags, bring a reusable carry one into the grocery store, bring a thermos instead of using a coffee cup with a plastic lid every day. Skip the straws. We really don't need it. Just try and eliminate what you can. Even if it's just one or two things every day or every week of your life, that contributes so much to helping the planet.
Well said. And, everybody's got to pitch in here and do what they can, but you're kind of going to extreme lengths there. I mean, this expedition is going to be challenging. You're somebody that can handle it, I'm sure, but you're uniquely qualified here. As I mentioned, you're a hero of mine, not only because of what you're doing, but there's a journalistic component to this also. You can go out and do this work, but you can come home and share this to folks. Tell us about that angle.
Yeah. That's why I was chosen. Like I said, there was 10,000 international applicants, and I applied thinking it was a long shot, but EXXpedition team was trying to find a crew of multidisciplinary women that have different backgrounds, different stories, different superpowers, they like to call it. So when we get home from our mission, we can all take this back to our community and share it in a different way. For me, mine's writing, editing, and publishing. I work for some of the top magazines in the country, and I have some stories coming up for them. And I also am a freelance author and editor for Capstone Publishers, which is nonfiction children's books. So I write mostly for 4th to 6th graders, educational books about science, about nature, about the planet. I've done a dozen about the ocean and the water cycle and the hydrosphere and all the things. So through the magazines, I can help the adult audiences kind of realize the problem and maybe change their perspective and shift their consumer behaviors. But for the younger audience, I want to teach them how to love the planet and develop healthy habits early on.
Hi, God, good on you. When I read your bio and when I hear that type of thing, a children's books writer as well, I'm always struck by, and I have guests on the podcast all the time, how little I've done with my life. I just feel like, man, I better get going because I'm just wasting my life. Now, the sad part about this is, well, it's not sad, but this ain't paid for. I mean, there's no major corporation that's sponsoring you. This takes money, and it's going to take your money, and you've got a way of raising that. Tell us about that before we go out of the podcast here.
Well, I've been working hard. Friends and family have helped quite a bit. I've needed to raise about $6,000 for my crew contribution, which goes directly to EXXpedition. It helps with gear, equipment, insurance fees, mooring fees, food, water on board, all that stuff. But then I also have to raise about $3,000 to pay for my airfare to Australia and home from Australia for my leg of the journey. So far, I'm about halfway. Friends and family in the local community have been really generous. I've written to a lot of companies, and I've had 2 local companies each donate $500, which has been helpful. And just last night, actually, I got a really good offer from, I can probably share it because it's pretty official, 4Ocean. They're the 2 surfer guys that have, sorry, got a notification. They started 4Ocean. They do ocean plastic cleanup with their skimmer boats, and they're out on the ocean 7 days a week cleaning it up. So they're going to partner with me since they're on the cleanup side. I'm going to be on more of the education side, teaching people how to reduce getting it into the ocean, and their team helps get it out of the ocean. And they agreed. They reached out to me yesterday and are going to be my final sponsor.
Oh, God, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. There we go. We get some news on Podcast by George every now and then. That's kind of breaking news. That's all great, and you're great on camera. And I tell folks all the time, and I do circle back with people on the podcast. I definitely, I'm going to come back to you as you, maybe just before you leave or maybe when you get back from this to find out what it's all about. It's EXXpedition. Yeah. You can still contribute. I did. I mean, if you want to feel good about something, you want to have a role in this, contribit to this. Again, give us where people can do this, where they can contribute.
The easiest way is just Venmo me. It's at Brynn-Baker. Because they don't take out any fees. It goes directly to me and to EXXpedition. Otherwise, if you find me on Facebook, just Brynn Baker, I have a fundraiser link on there as well. And anything that goes over my travel expenses and crew contribution, I donate directly to EXXpedition. So that would help the cause or help other people that with their funding in the scientific research.
That's great. She's on her way. That's Brynn Baker with EXXpedition. And I just, I'll tell you, this is a great podcast. I enjoy this. Brynn, we'll check in later. Good luck. Congratulations. Really appreciate what you're doing out there. That's what this podcast is all about. That's a hero of mine, Brynn Baker on EXXpedition. That's great. For right now, though, that's going to do it. We're going to wrap it up. Check out the podcast and all the various platforms. Contribute to her cause. That's money well spent. That's what it's all about. Folks, I want you to do that for sure. But for right now, we're going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.